Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Obviously, the Season 3 update had a ton of weapon tuning included in it, especially when it comes to the snipers. We saw so many changes there. We saw some changes to some of the long-range weapons, some SMGs. Today, we are going over the general Season 3 meta and breaking down the best weapons and where they rank in the current overall meta, whether they're at the very top, whether they're competitive, viable, garbage, or anywhere in between. As we go through it all, if you enjoy the video at any point, let me know by dropping a like on it. And if you're new here or if you have not already subscribed, every single day I got you covered with all things going on in COD, so feel free to hit that sub button and turn on those post notifications. Also, you may notice I got my fancy G Fuel shirt on right now all weekend long to celebrate the launch of Season 3. My G Fuel discount code WhosImmortal is actually boosted to get you 30% off your entire order as opposed to the normal 10%. So if you want to grab anything at all from the G Fuel site, now is quite literally the best time to do so. Link for that will be down in the description below. All right, so here we are on our overall meta tier list that I have not updated since pre-Season 3, minus adding in, of course, our two new weapons, the M1916 and the Nikita AVT. And I have a very long Word doc over here summarizing all these weapon changes that we got to go through and adjust our list accordingly for. First and foremost, though, let's talk about these two new weapons and drop some ranks in for these. First up, I've gone in and I've tested some of these guns in Plunder just to see how they felt and if they were worthy of being in a certain tier. And to me, the M1916 is probably going to be stuck in viable for a decent amount of time, just because it being a marksman rifle, I feel like its potential ceiling there is only so high, right? Like there really aren't marksman rifles, single shot weapons that you see up here that are that incredible, just because they're a higher skill weapon and they're kind of awkward and inconvenient to use. And to me, it's sort of the same deal there. The Nikita AVT, on the other hand, is feeling pretty good. I'd say it is definitely competitive at the very least. Pretty minimal recoil, some decent range, really feels solid, especially like up close and in mid-range fights. I'm liking how it feels a lot so far. So it's definitely competitive. We might see it eventually move up to top meta if it continues to be this consistent and other guns end up seeing some changes. Now that said, let's get into the actual weapon tuning and go weapon by weapon and see where they fall now. The STG, it mainly got like a range buff with some of the attachments on the meta loadout with velocity and damage range. That said, I don't feel like it necessarily jumps all the way up to top meta because we still have things like the AK-47, the AMAX, the XM4, the Vargo that I would still easily take over the STG at range, but it is going to feel a lot better over range than it did before. So it is definitely a more competitive rifle now, but not quite tip-top meta yet, you know? The Ultra Burst also saw some magazine capacity increases to make it even more consistent and you don't have to reload as often, but that's not something to me that makes it top meta either. It still stays in competitive. A really good rifle for like sniper support and some close range builds, but overall it's nothing that crazy. The Volk also got some updates here, primarily to range and velocity increases, so it'll be a little bit better in like medium and some long range fights. It's also decent up close if you build it out for like a sniper support build too. However, its TTK, even with a slightly better damage range and a little bit better velocity, is not something that's going to outgun something like the DP27, the AK, you know, the C58, so on and so forth. So again, I don't feel like that moves out of competitive. But that said, it's better than it was before. Now, the Vargo, they basically just went through here and nerfed the recoil all around, like on the main attachments, right? So it's not going to be as easy to shoot as it was before, but they didn't really adjust the TTK, which is right up there next to like the XM4 and the AK. And even then, it still has a very easy recoil pattern. I'd say still easier than the AK if you're holding down the triggers. So this one also stays in top meta. It's just not going to be as consistent and reliable as it was before, but still easily a top choice. The XM4 also got like a weird long range buff and nerf. They nerfed the minimum damage at range, but they also buffed its damage range a little bit. So it kind of offsets. Like this thing is still a top option in this category and in this list as well. Now, for some reason, they buffed the top break like a lot. They gave all of its damage ranges better damage, but it's still a Magnum at the end of the day, right? Like this thing is not reliable at all. So surprisingly, despite all this weapon tuning so far, I don't think this moves either. Everything is still staying in the same place. It's just slightly better than it was before, which in general is good. Like it promotes more competition, but I'm still never going to use the top break and I'm going to complain when I get it in the gulag still. So, I mean, buffs are cool, but they're not useful in this case. Now, the Diamati actually saw a headshot TTK nerf, or a headshot multiplier nerf. Honestly, before this update, I probably would have had the Diamati in top meta, and I think now it does drop down into competitive. Obviously, we haven't updated this list in some time, but after testing out the Diamati, we talked about it a couple days back in a video. Easily a top meta secondary here. I do think now it's in that competitive area though, because that headshot multiplier is not going to be as insane as it was before, and that really brings it closer in line as something like the amp as that go-to secondary pistol. Now here's where we finally see some movement. Ladies and gentlemen, the king has been dethroned. The Bren saw nerfs to its damage and saw nerfs to its control, and I think finally 5 nerfs later, the Bren is down into the competitive area. I would not take the Bren over a Cold War AK, over an XM4, even a DP27 now, because this is going to be way easier to use. Horizontal recoil is worse on this thing. The damage is worse on this thing. It's still going to be a decent option for players, but it's nowhere near what it once was. And yes, the Bren is finally no longer that clear and obvious choice for the long range meta. Now, the Whitley got some buffs and some nerfs. Like, they buffed its fire rate a little bit. Honestly, I feel like I'm overrating the Whitley here a little bit in competitive. I feel like this thing belongs more in the viable area, just because, like, it's awkward, it's slow, it's not really that reliable or consistent. The TTK is not that phenomenal. At first, you know, when we're getting used to it, it felt like it could compete in this area, but now when I look at these other LMGs, I'm taking the MG42 over it. I'm definitely taking the Bren over it. It doesn't really belong in that category. Then we get into this very long list of sniper buffs, and you're gonna notice that while there's a ton of change here, there's not gonna be much movement. But that's a good thing, because that means everything is a lot closer and more competitive, which ultimately is the end goal here. We'd like for everything to be in the competitive category, right? But first up here, the AX50 got a slight buff, and it's really good for range. I keep it in competitive though, because, spoiler alert, I don't think there are any meta snipers anymore because the changes. You're either having a really good close range aggressive sniper, or you're having a really good long range sniper, and the AX50 is one of those long range snipers that now is going to be very reliable on Caldera, but you probably wouldn't want to use it on Rebirth. So to me, it stays in competitive because it's not overall the best choice. The Dragunov. We get to talk about the Dragunov, which is in garbage. And guess what? It's staying in garbage. They buffed its damage a little bit, but it's still the Dragunov. It still is like a 3-shot kill minimum at any range. It's just not worth it. Like, yeah, you could get some headshots with it, but it's still not going to be good, and it can't one-shot headshot. Never use it. Just avoid the Dragunov at all costs. It still sucks. Now, the HDR, sort of in the same boat as the AX50 here. It got a slight nerf to its range, but it's still really good for long range. And I can see a lot of players using both these just because they're familiar with them. These two are probably some of the top choices for long range sniping at this point. But again, up close, you can't really use them because they have that slightly slower ADS despite their great velocity. So they're not aggressive. They're just good snipers that are good at long range sniping. Now, the Kar98K. It got a buff to its damage, but it's no longer good at range. Like, you cannot one-shot headshot unless you're within 50 or 55 meters, I think is the approximate area there. So on Rebirth, yes, the Kar98K would be a top weapon. But now, especially on Caldera, if you're outside of 50 meters, which really is not that far if you go in game and ping what 50 meters is, this cannot be a top meta sniper anymore. And I think it is now in line with things like the Pellington, the HDR, the AX50, because it's really good at one thing, super aggressive sniping. Like if you're on the rooftop of prison on Rebirth and going back and forth, it would work. If you're on Caldera, you have no range, and it's just not worth it. The SPR, honestly, because we talked about this last week as well, should have been in top meta prior to this video. We just haven't updated the list. It would also be dropping down into the competitive area now because it also is bad for range. It's decent up close, and you can snipe within, 60 meters and get that one-shot headshot. This also has a slower ADS than something like the Car, though, so you wouldn't want to be taking it over the Car, but it still is competitive for some sniping in certain cases. It's really not going to thrive anymore, though, because these nerfs. The Swiss, just like the Car, also dropping down into the competitive category. I mean, it's just not really good for range anymore. You can't one-shot down somebody across 200 meters. You have to be within that 50 to 60, 65 meter area where it will be good. Just like the Car on Rebirth, you could run both these still, but not in general. It's not a top tier weapon. Now, the ZRG got a buff here, got a buff for range essentially, which to me bumps it up into this area where you might be choosing between wanting to use the ZRG or the AX50. The ZRG has insane velocity and is now going to be one of the top long-range sniping options in the game. absolutely a competitive sniper. The M82 got a range buff, but it also can't one shot to the head, so it's still viable. Like, you could use it, but it's not going to be a very good sniper at all. Scrolling back up, the Pellington here, I think it stays in competitive. It got some damage buffs and probably is going to be the #1 option for aggressive sniping, because I think it has a slightly better range than the Swiss or even the car, but it's still, you know, not going to be a phenomenal sniper when you're sniping at 200 meters, 250 meters and beyond, stuff like that, even beyond 60 or 70 meters. It's not going to be anything that crazy because the limitations on the one-shot knock potential. So like I said, there are no longer any meta snipers. The Tundra, I feel like, stays. Honestly, it might even drop down to viable. And I say that because they classify it as an aggressive sniper, so it can only one shot to the head up close. At range, it's not really able to compete, which, I mean, the Tundra to me didn't even feel like an aggressive sniper. It was definitely a long range one in my opinion. So I feel like they hurt the one area where the Tundra might be good at long range. I wouldn't take it over something like a ZRG or an AX50. So that one, in my opinion, actually does get knocked down. The Rytech had some slight changes. It got nerfed. It's still niche though. Like, you could use it if you wanted to for explosives. In totally normal BR, you can use it to jump around, but it's not a realistically good sniper in any capacity. Then we got the Type 99. It's really just not that good for range, but it is decent up close for aggressive sniping. They buffed the ADS in and out transition speed a little bit, so this is up there with the Pellington, the car, the Swiss in that general close range sniping meta, but it's nothing too crazy. The Vanguard car, pretty much the same exact deal. Decent up close, not good for range anymore. And then you have the 3-line, which out of any sniper on this list is the closest, I would say, to being a meta sniper. It's still not, because it's a Vanguard sniper and it's got its cons because of that, but they buffed it for range and it's good for range. They don't classify this as an aggressive sniper, so it can one-shot headshot, but like I said, Vanguard snipers don't really feel all that good, so that's sort of limiting it here. But it is a much better sniper now and a way more competitive sniper versus these other options than it was a week ago. They also made some changes to the Gorenko, the PTRS. It's decent for range, but it's just awkward feeling, so I don't think it gets above viable. Now, the Armor Guerra, they actually nerfed the close range barrel on it, and they also made it so that the Kurz mag has better damage but a worse fire rate, I believe. I don't think that changes it. It's a lot of offsetting buffs and nerfs there, so it still stays as competitive. It's an all right SMG, but nothing too crazy. Curiously enough, the Owen Gun's top meta setup with like the Gorenko 72 round mags and the rapid barrel got some nerfs. The multipliers were nerfed, and so is the fire rate on the barrel. But there's so many other build options with the Owen gun that, in my opinion, it easily stays as a top meta option and one of the top subs in the game. The MP40 short barrel also got a slight nerf. Now it's not going to be as dominant as it was before. It has the mobility going for it though, and it still has a decent TTK, a lot closer to like the PPSH now instead of being a lot closer to the Owen gun and the Well gun. I still think that the MP40 remains in top meta as well, but you're going to notice it's not going to kill quite as quick as before. And then lastly, the M1 Grand got a buff for limb damage. Need I say more? Outside of that, I do want to make a couple of other changes here. I believe that all these guns in top meta currently stay. The AK, best gun in the game yet again. They didn't nerf it for some reason in this update. It still fries and has one of the best TTKs over range. Vargo and XM4 are also up there. Lappa is the one non-Vanguard sub that you can rely on still, although they are getting closer to having some of these Vanguard subs with these nerfs being more in line with some of the MW and other Cold War options. AMAX still has an insane TTK on Caldera with 300 health. Type 100, great for sniper support. DP27, the one decent LMG from Vanguard, I feel like right now, sort of overtakes the Bren because the nerfs. AS44, that close range build is just absurd. I feel like that has to remain in top meta. Well gun now is a lot closer in competition to the Owen gun, I feel like, so I can see a lot more players using this. The Sten still has an insane TTK, and the PPSH hipfire or ADS builds are absolutely great too. Super reliable. So everything here I feel like has a rightful place, and they all hold their own. But you also have this massive competitive area, and there's a few guns here that I feel like could probably change a little bit. Like, for instance, the MW AUG. We've talked about this recently. The TTK on this thing is crazy. With the ammo conversion or with the 9mm, it's kind of nuts how powerful this is. So I feel like it does have a home in top meta right now. We'll see if that lasts, but for now, it is a great option. The Farah, I also feel like does get bumped up a little bit here. It's got a very similar TTK to things like the Vargo and the XM4, so it's got good recoil, and if it can match that TTK, I mean, the stats sort of speak for themselves. So that said, that's the general overview of the Season 3 meta right now. That's where I'd place these guns as it stands. Of course, as we see future weapon tuning, we'll be updating this list as it goes. We're obviously going to break down the top loadouts for these weapons in the coming days, so stay tuned for that. But that's going to wrap things up for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, let me know by dropping a like on it. And if you're new here or if you have not already subscribed, every single day I got you covered with all things going on in COD. So feel free to hit that sub button and turn on those post notifications. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy. Have an awesome rest of your day. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.